I'm Chris Sidoti. I'm an international lawyer. I'm not an academic. I don't do law, international law in an academic world. I work in the practical world of investigation, making findings on the basis of the law and the evidence, and making recommendations. So since 2021, I've been a commissioner on the United Nations Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and on Israel. Because we were appointed 2021, we have been looking at this issue before the events of 7 October 2023. But understandably, what has happened since then has been so overwhelming, even in this 100-year war, that has been the principal focus of our attention since then. Australia has obligations under international law. Unfortunately, we seem more and more to be ignoring many of those obligations. But historically and traditionally, we have been one of the strongest supporters of international law. We're seeing at the moment, however, and just take the example of the Palestine-Israel conflict, we're seeing situations arising where the Australian response has been far less than what is required of us under international law. There are issues that we've identified in the Commission of Inquiry reports as requiring action by individual states, including Australia, and I do know that the Red Line package is a significant attempt to address some of those issues. Issues like broadening the definition of what military-related trade is prohibited, and I certainly prefer military-related as the description rather than arms and ammunition. It's addressing questions of trade with Israel, and particularly trade with settlements and financial support for settlements. The Australian government says, quite rightly, that for some years now there has been a ban on the export of weapons and ammunition to Israel. And they're right in saying that, and that's good. But it's far too narrow. It avoids the question of the actual nature of the export trade we have with Israel, and the fact that we are providing military components and dual-use items that can be used for military purposes. We are manufacturing components for the F-35 in this country. Many of that manufacturing initiatives, efforts being conducted here in Newcastle. We know that F-35s have been used during the violence in Gaza over the last 2.5 years. We know that they have played a critical role in the saturation bombing of Gaza that has involved the deaths of tens of thousands of people. And we know that they require the kinds of parts that we're producing. Now, it's not good enough to say, well, we just don't know whether any of our parts are in these machines. Whether we know or not, we are part of a system that is providing those parts. We can be certain, because we know that there have been direct flights going from Williamtown to Tel Aviv. We can be certain that there are some Australian components that are going across there. But just being part of an international network that is keeping Israeli F-35s in the air is enough to ring warning bells and tell us that we should get out of that. So this is an issue. The government is saying, firstly, that these are not weapons as such, they're only components. Secondly, that we are part of an international supply chain network around the F-35, where the United States manufacturers have subcontracted a number of other companies for the production of these components. And third, we don't actually know whether they go to Israel or not, because we provide them to the supply chain hubs. And so that's an example of how we have taken a very narrow technical response to the international law obligations and really missed the point. International law requires a far more comprehensive response to a situation like we've seen there. And I use that as just one example. It seems to me that we are failing in accepting and implementing, acting on our responsibilities under international law. I think that Parliament needs certainly more conversations, but also more action. These kinds of issues often get tossed around by the crossbenchers or the small parties like the Greens, and are not taken seriously by either the government or the opposition. And there are opportunities through which that can be done, but there is a need for that to be done. So I think the proposals, the Red Line proposals about new legislation, can at least be a vehicle to ensure that parliamentary committees can start these discussions. We're not going to have any form of stronger legislation unless there are serious discussions taking place first. When I look back historically, and you know, I'm an old bloke, I have seen a lot of things. And when I look back, even in my lifetime, but before that as well, the thing I learn is that change is inevitable. It's going to happen. The only question is whether change leads to better situations or worse. That's an open question. What keeps me going is the certainty that there is going to be change and a sense of responsibility to do all that I can to ensure that the inevitable change that will occur is for the better and not for the worse. We need to remember things can be worse. Even though it's as bad as it is, things can be worse. And our job is to make sure that it's better.